Hello, everyone, people from the internet and YouTube. I am back, but this time I am joined by a very, very special guest, tenor extraordinaire. I'm a big fan, and you guys probably know him already. He is the high notes expert, one of the golden voices of the century, Mario Lanza lover, guitar player, pasta lover, all things, especially the last three that I mentioned. Welcome, Andrew Owens, everybody. How are you, Andrew?
Hey, hello, sir. Thank you for having me very much.
Yeah, like I mentioned to you already, I am fangirling over here internally. Actually, I might be one of the few people that have known of you, even though this is the first time we actually meet, since before the the famous Salvatore Fisichella masterclass.
Yes.
Which obviously, well, we can talk a little bit about that stuff, because I'm sure you've been asked this a billion times
No,
already.
totally.
Actually, I've known you from this blog, which at the time, we're talking about 2012, maybe 20, I don't know, 2010, we're quite like already more than a decade ago. This blog where I was like, how do I sing in the tenor voice? And I was just trying to do research and research. I fell on this blog. Funny now, I know it was by Maestro Jack Levini, and he used in his blog, he had examples of one of his pupils, one of his students, funny enough, Andrew Owens, and there was recordings of you singing like "Thine Alone" from Mario Lanza and things like that.
Oh, that's right. I
Yeah.
remember that. I think it was, yeah, it was that. There was another Lanza thing that I put on there. I think it was like I'll Walk
Probably.
with God or something like that too. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe that was in there too.
And I had a Mario Lanza obsession at the same time. I watched all his movies, and I was just like, God, I want to sing like this guy. But obviously, we'll get into all that stuff. But funny enough, yes, I known you from there, and then I connected the dots. I was like, oh yeah, that's this. Oh my God, yeah, Andrew. So that's super cool. With that being said, this isn't really an interview. This is, for the people out there who are sort of in their development of the voice. We all are, anyways, even professionals. We're always constantly developing the voice. Always students. Just sort of technical talk, two guys chatting. We're trying to build a community where it's comfortable and we're all open to talk about technique, and it can sometimes be a taboo because it gets very complicated in the opera industry. Technique sometimes is very personal to one person, to themselves. But it's time. I feel like we should start having open conversations. The knowledge is there, the information is there. We just have to be civil about it, be nice to each other about it. If you are watching this video and already are Milwaukee method, Franco Corelli method, what are they talking about? We can all explain, but let's do it not in a negative way. Let's just be very, very human with one another. So with that being said, Andrew, what are some of the tips that you can give to a young developing singer? Maybe top 5 tips that you could give when it comes to developing the voice.
First, I want to pop in a quick disclaimer before that, and it goes along with something you were saying. I've never been the type to claim that my way is the way. It just simply works for me. And to be honest, sometimes even then it doesn't, and I have to adjust. Especially as I've gotten older. When I turned 40 this past year, and I noticed certain things aren't happening the way they used to, and I faced a similar kind of trade-off point in about 2011, and the same thing happened honestly right when I was turning 30, and I had to adjust, and I had to do a very similar thing. So I guess that's my disclaimer that, like you said, the people who are going to jump all over this, look, these are ideas that work for me. I'm always open to new ideas, and I love changing and learning and studying with people and talking with people like yourself and going, oh, you know what, that could work. Because there's still parts of my own technique that I'm like, yeah, I really wish I could do that better. Because, I have students who come and meet me, and they're like, how do you do this? And I say, that's a good question. When I find out, I'll let you know. Because it's still, there's certain things. But back to your question, I would say one thing that's really important, I would tell them to record yourself a lot. I love the technology we have today, and young singers who are in school now have the ability now, more than we were able to just have a great high quality recorder in your pocket at all times. And I remember one day going through my voice memos, and I was just a little embarrassed at how many little 13-second voice memos there were of this, that, and then I'm like, what are these from 2000 or whatever? And it's all just me singing a phrase here and a phrase here and a phrase there. And, you know, it's nice to kind of go back there and, you know, almost like making a trail in reverse and going, oh yeah, I remember when I was on that hook or on that, you know, kick of doing this and only this. Okay. And I can remember, kind of retrace my steps. That's a big one. I would say, and this is the thing I tell everybody, the biggest tip I have for young singers is like, always be teachable. Always be teachable. When I was in college, I was so insecure about my technique and about this and that I had my strengths and I had the things that I did well. And when people heard my deficiencies and tried to fix them, I would bristle and go, no, I don't need to do that. Look, because I do this really well.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really until I met Jack Lavigne that I was like, okay, it's time to open up and try something new. Because for me, so many things weren't working at the time that I needed someone to just kind of rebuild everything that was going on. So, you know, get a lot of opinions, be teachable, because, you know, I've had a handful of people who would come to me for a lesson, and a couple of them are just like, yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. And I almost, in my head, want to say, well, what was the point of this? Did you want me to just tell you, great job, you're perfect, everything's wonderful, you don't need me? Like,
Yeah.
Maybe you don't need me, but it's not ready yet or something. So, yeah, I mean, we can get into the technical nitty gritty stuff, but I think those are two things that are on the periphery that I think are very important for a lot of singers.
Yeah, I love it. I love recording yourself and being vulnerable enough to accept that there's things that you need to work on. And I do that to this day. It shouldn't, you know, don't I feel like you should never let it, I guess, hurt your ego or anything like that, you know, especially when we're there to train. You know, I always like to think of going to a practice session or a vocal session like going to the gym, you know, in a way, not like to compare singing to weightlifting, but the idea of we're there to grow, to make a certain part of our instrument, and in our case, our instrument, grow. So if we go with that mentality, it's like, here is my weak part. So instead of hiding it, here it is. Let's strengthen that, fix that. And as far as recording, I mean, it's funny because I was thinking as you were saying that, I was like, I have the same exact recording sessions. Like my entire vocal journey is recorded with cameras and phones and stuff and stored.
Yeah, sure is.
From my first Caro Mio band, which sounds horrendous, to you know, every time you have to record yourself. Love that.
But you know what's interesting? The thing, to hop on that really quick for 2 seconds, the thing I wish I did more back then was record myself when I wasn't singing well. And then I had made recordings of that to send to my teacher. I'm like, what's wrong? But if I was like, wow, I feel really good today, I'm going to record it. A lot of the stuff that I recorded, I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good. That's really good. But I wish I would have recorded when there were some things to diagnose, you know, and there were like issues about what's happening today. Let me try to sing this and send this off for analysis. That's another thing. And one more thing on top of that, I remembered another thing that's important is get familiar with your body, get familiar with the anatomy here. And because when I was in grad school, we had to do movement classes, and they were the stupidest thing to me at the time.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to walk in at 10 a.m. to roll around on a mat. This is so stupid. And then when I started having some muscular problems, yeah, literally, and I started having some muscular issues, I remember going, wow, and I had to do body work to fix it. And I remember thinking, man, this is more important than I realized, to identify good tension and bad tension, and where I should hold it, where I shouldn't hold it. And yeah, I think that don't discount the importance of doing Feldenkrais or doing Alexander technique or doing stuff like that actually makes you aware of your body. Actually,
it's something I haven't spoken about yet. Maybe a future video about the fact that, you know, the instrument is not just here; it's your entire body. And funny enough, if you're sore, you know, there have been very, even old school singers who there might be sore in a hip or an abdominal, cancel performance. You know what I mean? And to this day, I always make sure to stretch. It's actually one of the first things I do, even before warming up, stretching. Oh, really here, the intercostals, the neck area, have a little massage gun, the temples, relax everything, release all the tensions, the entire body. It really is. And it might feel dumb, but it actually does affect the overall sound process. That is fantastic. Really good suggestions. Continuing forward, there are any sort of, I guess, epiphany moments for you as to, we're talking tenor stuff here. Everyone's obviously interested in the high range. How do I get up there? I've tried to sing and it locks around F sharp, which funny enough, we know that's around the passaggio for lyric tenors. And then I can't, and if I go, I strain. How can I open that up? How can I start building my voice?
I think it kind of links back to what I talked about just a second ago. What we were talking about was the things that physically can inhibit you from reaching those areas. And for me, the discovery that my tongue and jaw were actually getting in the way a lot was really big for me. It felt a lot like the end of some kind of a thriller movie where, the best friend all of a sudden turns out to be the bad guy and there's this big twist. And I literally am sitting there like, oh my God, tongue, it was you the whole time? Like it was this kind of realization of, yeah, literally just stuff like, okay, oh wow, I'm really driving it down there. I'm really driving it down. And as far as the top goes, realizing that in an effort at the time, what I was doing to, here and there, we may be getting into technical talk, so hang in there, guys. I'll explain it. I'm sure we'll both try to explain it the best we can. But realizing that as I was going higher, especially when I was reaching about A flat A, I had an insistence, actually, without knowing it, of actually depressing the back of the tongue in order to create some kind of a lower position. When in actuality, what I was doing was actually the tongue was just sitting on top of the larynx, and I actually, in some way, shape, or form, was actually loosening the adduction and getting an overly chesty sound and losing a lot of harmonics and cutting off a lot of that. And when I just sort of threw the switch in reverse and kind of, allowed it to start, oh, let me go this way, I reversed the path of going, thinking, to kind of going, in this direction. And starting to feel that right after that nice little bottleneck kind of area around G, A flat, which depending on the rep, of course, you can give it a higher position, or you can give it a more kind of placement to it, or if you're topping off at that, maybe in Mozart or Handel, you can kind of give them a bit more upper partials. What happened to me?
Yeah.
What are these
I don't know.
fireworks?
I think you hit it on the nail, and it just said, "Good job, Andrew. That's the answer."
No, I need to find out what setting is on my Skype for this, because sometimes I'll be saying something and then I'll get the thumbs and I get all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Any exercise tips maybe for someone who perhaps is still somewhat confused as to what you're referring? Like any physical exercise tips or scales or sort of to in order to release that tongue tension that you might suggest?
Yeah, there's stuff I like to do actually between. Let me open up the old piano here. It's a lot of mid-range stuff. If I'm thinking right around that tilt area from C to F. Yeah. If I start right at C and I just kind of jostle the root of the tongue between two vowels, just going. Like that. So
Yeah. Especially the back.
Exactly. Because you'll be amazed when some singers will do that. When they go into a sustained thing, the tongue wants to move along. You'll hear often you hear that.
Yeah.
Continuing in this more that. Without, of course, shoving the whole thing too forward. We want to keep it, as I tell my students, still behind this line of thinking back there a little bit, but without the tongue assisting in that action of thinking about creating tilt, but not with the tongue.
Yeah, not depressing or falling it back.
Exactly.
I talk a lot about this yawn position, right? Sort of our onset, which happens naturally when we yawn, right? The larynx lowers, palate softens, raises. But a lot of what happens is when we create that space for the first time, everything since our throat literally in a way opens, everything sort of falls back, and even our tongue and our vowels as well can sometimes fall in the temptation of going backward. And it doesn't matter if you have the wonderful yawn position. If you're blocking that space with the tongue and the vowels, or everything is just dark and dark and dark, we fall into that sort of artificial darkness, ingolato sound that doesn't really 100%. Have resonance to it. So I love that.
Yeah, I love that. It's a lot like, there's a great video that Jack posted. I'm sure you probably saw it, where he's talking about the brain just being able to compute a yawn position with adduction. It's simply the idea of thinking about when the brain signals, I'm going into yawn, it's okay, loosen the cord, of thinking about this. So it's why a lot of times, like you said, you'll hear this ingolato kind of woofy thing with people who have a lot of tilt, but not a lot of closure, going, or you'll have a short chord position with lots of adduction but no tilt, with a you have that, but finding the both of them together took me a long time to try to find that.
Yeah, and I think he mentions that, I remember that video that he posted. He says that it's not, the brain doesn't really register, like you said, it doesn't compute it, and you have to trick the brain into understanding that you can have the yawn position with the chord closure. And that's when he starts to talk about glottal attacks, soft glottal attacks, as an exercise to start engaging in the brain. Okay, I can maintain this position, and get that closure. And a lot of what we do, like you mentioned, is very Buddha, very yin yang. We can never go to extreme. Funny enough, we end up going to an extreme. We always do. And we hit that wall. We say, okay, that's an extreme. Let me figure out how to get back on track. And then we end up hitting the other extreme, right? And then let me get back on track. And out of the vocal journey, it's sort of this zigzag. For the people watching, it'll save you a lot of time if you understand that a lot of what we talk about as singers is very subtle. It's much more subtle than you might think. If someone says a low larynx, the first thing we do, okay, low larynx, extreme. So it's like, we're talking about subtlety here. We want a comfortable position in which you're able to sing in an open manner, and a resonant manner. So that, I love that. Did Salvatore, by any chance, I sometimes message him. I mean, he's obviously older now. He doesn't respond all the time, but he has responded. I'm very jealous because he's one of my idols. I would love to have to study with him. But he actually mentioned sticking your tongue out as well. And relax a little bit. And even though the sound might be ugly, it's not about the sound when we're developing the voice. It's more about the sensation. Has he ever mentioned that to you? As far as
a little bit. What he tends to do is, I mean, this goes along with what you said about taking things to extremes. Was that one of my idols is Bergonzi. I love Bergonzi. He's one of my heroes, and I tend to kind of I got his voice so much in my ear that I went into this cavità, this kind of back placement. I went almost too far. And the last time I saw Salvatore, keep in mind that Salvatore and Jack are literally like family. Like Salvatore's like his uncle. But it doesn't mean that the two of them don't have their conflicts about technique.
It's an Italian family. They have
all the time. Not even Italian, Sicilian family, mind you. So even more so. So Jack has told me that there's been times when like they've gone out after a long day of teaching and they chat and they get into these really intense conversations where like Salvatore's getting really like irritated about, no, it has to be this way and this and that. So for me, like when I went to him, he just like I was getting into this idea and he was like, ma che cosa è questa? Questa è una cosa di Jack. And I'm like, oh. So, and mind you, it's not that Jack said he was wrong. I simply was taking it too far, and Jack even told me that like you're getting too stiff with the adduction; it's getting stuck. But what he would get me into was actually trying to feel the giro, the turn of the voice, actually much further than Jack has me do, which he tries to get me to feel it much more back here.
Mm-hmm.
Which, in honesty, I've had success with both approaches, but depending on what I'm doing, and one hears that, you know, when you hear Jack sing or stuff like that, when he gets into, or if anyone's ever worked with him, as you get into this range, there's kind of this slow drawing back of like a back there, whereas you'll hear Salvatore go wide open like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I remember there's also a video in YouTube, also very, very known, of Jack, and younger Jack, with Salvatore as well, kind of work, you know, and it's true. I mean, he talks about, I think Salvatore talks about this, coperto or aperto ma coperto. Is this open but still closed and still, you know, in that tilt position, and it is, it's very defining of his sound. I don't personally know how he gets. How exactly he does, you know, because there's a moment where I do feel more towards, I guess, what you would call Jack's feeling of this, of the giro, the turn a little bit more back. And the more open I keep it, maybe I feel like I quite can't get the turn as easier, but it's very interesting to kind of hear how he does it, because I love his sound, you know what I mean? So it's very very curious. Could you demonstrate?
I can try. Yeah, sure. I should preface with, I actually had a lesson with Jack the other day, and we were getting into it, so I'm a little puffy today. But if we go like to this A flat here, I'm horrible at the piano. But thinking kind of more back, so if I go, like that, which kind of goes back in this direction. Whereas Salvatore would kind of make it more open and go, like that, and everything is more this. What's really interesting is, since I started to kind of reverse that, what do you want to call it, the process of thinking a bit more up as I got to these notes, it actually changed my mouth position, which was very, very, very interesting. I, for a long time, was a bottom teeth singer, and if you watch anything on my Instagram, when I'm showing stuff, you'll see a lot of this. Now, mind you, it worked okay, but I was cutting off certain harmonics when I did that. And when I started to think about these notes, if I think about them more in this direction, and meaning like up and over, ringing kind of more top teeth up, I couldn't sing them like this. So like it was impossible to reach that if I didn't get more lift in the tone.
Yeah, kind of like an inner smile, like a biting into an apple or something.
Big time, big time.
I'm actually doing some new repertoire now, and it's hard because I'm in that same exact boat where there are moments. It's kind of, I always feel like those type of, I don't know, concepts, I guess you would call it, the mouth positions, are also kind of like another brush or another tool in your tool shed. You know what I mean? Depending on the musical phrase, for me, it changes. For some reason, the more forte and the more like bigger the orchestral sound and the more declamatory the phrase, the more I actually find that I go bottom teeth. The more like early bel-canto, duca, you know, type of thing, the more front teeth. And it's different for me. I mean, it's maybe some flaw of mine, because I mean, obviously the idea is to always sing. It's one technique for, don't change your techniques for roles. But it is interesting to know that bottom position. And obviously one of the most famous bottom teethers known, Corelli, right? And possibly, you know, Fisichella always in that position. That more of that biting position. More of that ping. I always feel that ping. But It's very interesting. There seems like there's sort of a fallback on. There's some sort of support process on this, but you need to trust more of that sound. That's sort of that thing.
Exactly. And like I said, it seems to. For me, I definitely still utilize a bit of this in this area here, but then it's like, and then there's that. Yeah. And for me, it took listening to more squillante, kind of brilliant voices like Filipeschi or something like that, and listening to the pure in his sound. Right. And it's the epitome of the cry that Jack talks about, of it literally, you know, like from which there's like no better combination of to put you in that spot.
Yeah.
Of right. Just, yeah. Thinking it's like in that.
I love those vowel combinations, like yeah, kind of like a J cloud to an A, because it puts your tongue also in the root of an E vowel. Which,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is great for if you're watching this. As an exercise, I always say if you warm up or your A vowel seems to get wide, or you feel tension in the tongue, yeah, to get that position, and that tongue out of the way.
I agree.
That's really fantastic. Now another sort of a concept that I was in a way taught, and I didn't understand it at first. Now I'm starting to I understand the idea, right? Is sort of the tenor voice as a whole. If you grab a tenor and you grab their range, is kind of like this sand clock, right? It's this sort of figure, which is like open, small, open. And when I was told that, I was like, what the heck are you talking about? And when it comes to the range of the tenor, we do see that at the bottom, it could be very speech-like. You know, it's actually better when it is more speech-like. You know, della mia bella incognita borghese. There's no need to get into that tilt position at the bottom. It's like it's very parlando, very speech-like. As we ascend into this passaggio area, right? There's a tilt position. The voice, in a way, starts to narrow. It needs to focus more, right? It's this idea of if you continue to open, it very much becomes difficult, right? It's that idea of right. So if it's open, if it's like that sand clock, that very Pavarotti bright that he always sings, but if we continue open, it gets very hard to get in that tilt position. If we now have that idea, we start to focus the sound, right? And then we can then, as we continue to ascend, open up again. What we were in a way talking about with mouth positions. Just because the very top we're singing it like, you know, in that apple biting, but it doesn't mean that we should sing in the middle like that either. It's a very fragile. It's sort of that sort of shape of the range, which is it helped me a lot in a way to kind of understand how to build the voice in a way.
You're right. Yeah, and I think for me, one of the misunderstandings I had, especially because, you know, the first things I started doing freelance were a lot of Rossini, and when I was doing a lot of Rossini, I tended to take this approach. Without the hourglass thing, it was literally this.
Just points, just from there to there.
Points all the way to the top, and what that meant was narrow, all the way to the top, which is where this kind of tendency to go down and get small as it went higher. So if I'm going like, so if I go da 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 da, if I'm going the temptation for me was to go like which kind of I get the note out, but it's very pinched.
Very pinched, very squeezed, maybe. Narrow. I was gonna say like a squeezed feeling, like
a little bit. There's a tug here, but there's also just very limited.
Yeah.
As opposed to kind of reopening, like you said. We'll try it out. it, then it opens up more, and it just has much more cry, and it feels like it lives here and not down there. Narrowing here, reopening into that kind of situation.
You can hear it. I mean, I hear it. The much more. The harmonics are much more there. The resonance is much more there.
Yeah, I'm actually one of those annoying tenors who, when I have colleagues in town, like good friends, especially tenors, I literally grab them. I pull them into a room and I said, I need you to tell me if this is okay or if this is not okay. And I had one of our colleagues and buddies, Stephen Costello, was here doing a Verdi Requiem. And he's just sitting there like calmly, and I said, okay, this is what I normally do. And he goes, okay, sounds okay. And I said, and this is what I'm working on now. And he goes, that. So,
that's great.
I love when somebody confirms that, you know.
And I love that. I love that you guys can have that type of chat, you know, and talk. It's very rare, you know. I mean, unfortunately, but that's sort of what we're trying to do here. Just kind of open up and talk about this kind of stuff. Tell me a little bit about the cry, and then we'll go into. So I have a couple of questions that a lot of people have commented on, and it'll be nice to kind of get your opinions on it. These are sort of like the top comments that have come in sort of similar subjects. So might as well good to talk about that. But tell me about this tenor cry. I think it's very important in singing, obviously, this sort of relaxation. Tell me a little bit about it. Tell me what it means and how does it work when it comes to like phonation.
So for me, I'm still working out how best to explain it from a pedagogy kind of point of view and get more of the nuts and bolts of what's occurring. But I think for me, because I tend to be a very descriptive, I use a lot of imagination, it's easy for me to kind of explain it more so in those terms and how it feels. That's always more importantly to me. But for me, it's just it's a better balance or mixture between the registers, and it just involves, to me, the anchoring that one gets with a tilted chest position, but then it's just simply letting, as one other teacher I worked with years ago says, just letting the smoke kind of go up the chimney, feeling much more in this area.
Yeah.
And one of the ways I had to do to feel that was I had to kind of let go here in order to really feel it truly. And that came from, again, going in the other direction. So from a much more muscular kind of like, if I'm on B flat or something, getting away from which I feel completely here, to allowing the voice to completely detach and feel it much more. And making all these awful sounds that we like to make in rooms.
I love that. I tell that all the time. I said, I know it feels funky and funny to you, but it's going to help you in a way, like you said. It's a better mixture of voices. It's kind of like this cry, this sigh, this moan, you know, like, or this puppy. It stops you from forcing sound. That grunt, like that Mickey Mouse, whatever you want to call it, in a way. It's this sigh with chord closure. Sigh with chord closure.
Absolutely. And for me, what helped for me was finding gentle consonants that could encourage that phonation without pushing air and without locking. So for me, you exactly what you talked about was, you said subtlety at the top of this session. And for me, one thing that I noticed everybody takes to an extreme, understandably, especially if it's not familiar with them, is this idea of chord closure and this idea of things like using glottals and using things to kind of silent cough, all these kind of things.
Gentle coughing, yeah.
Yes, and people tend to exaggerate this. I was no exception, and this slamming together. So for me, I like to think about it as like the process is, if you had a mouthful of soap and you're blowing little bubbles like this, the idea of chord closure and these kind of glottals to me is reversing that process, inhaling the bubble and it popping here, and thinking, so that you feel this. You have the gesture of inhale, and then this that way you feel it not right behind the nose, but it's this and finding soft consonants that can encourage that in this kind of cry range. So if you're, when you really need it, which to me is above G sharp. So A. Some people will utilize it. You know, I mean, I'm talking solely for the high notes here. We need a lot of cry in the passaggio if you really need to
Right.
like get in there, of course. But as far as the high goes, just thinking, for me, thinking a word like dat, or dat, something gentle, and just going dat, 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 and it feels almost falsetto-ish in a way.
And that is the tricky. I mean, I'm gonna just jump in right there, but that's very tricky because a lot of people hear falsetto and they go, nope, that's not opera, that's falsetto. And it's not really falsetto. It may feel like falsetto, which is what we want. That's literally Lauri Volpi said. It must feel like falsetto. It's not falsetto, but the sensation must feel like falsetto, which is great in the top. We want that because you need to fight the natural instinct, I think, of wanting to continue to lift that chest, fully chested high notes in which we go, ah, and it does feel like a lift or weight or a lot of pressure that we just cannot hold as, you know, and this is great what you mentioned. Sorry, continue.
No, it's fine, but it's not true. But it's about the difference, meaning like the falsetto and the full thing is another exercise that can be tricky is actually finding that very light phonation and practicing alternating between this more kind of heady kind of tone and then honestly allowing yourself with the same position to break into chest voice in the full thing. So thinking kind of like if you go much more of a, which is much more head dominance, but then kind of switching and going, it's hard to hear it over Skype, but one is much more in this kind of phonation, and then one just kind of, I feel like, expands outward, and all of a sudden you engage the legit voice.
No, I totally understand. And you know, a lot of people are always thinking like, how can I release my high notes? How can I make them more easier? And one thing they mentioned that I also tell my students is instead of trying to add head voice to the chest sound that you have, instead of trying to be like, ah, how do I add head voice? Ah, start in falsetto. It's sacrilege. It's not sacrilege. It's okay. It's for a training purpose. It's for a developing purpose. I'm not telling you to go on stage and sing in falsetto. Start in falsetto. Disconnect entirely.
Yeah.
Ooh valve. Very, very ooh long valve. Ooh, 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 ooh. Feel the sensation. How does it feel? Much more lighter. Not so much pressure. And gradually, every day, this isn't something that's going to happen overnight under 1 hour. Every day, you add just a little bit more connection to that chest.
Yes.
And then you're like, you're there. Okay, great. Now, see, like you're seeing the gap between those two worlds, which feel very hard, but they're not. It's connected by a very, very thin imaginary string, I would say.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a teenager, and I was just kind of getting into opera, and I was listening to a lot of recordings. Obviously, I didn't have the top yet, but I developed it fairly soon. I started listening and getting into opera around the age of about 15 or 16, and I had all my recordings, and I remember I have a pretty good talent for mimicry. I can do people's voices and do a lot of that stuff. So I have the ability to kind of, in my head, hear something and sort of emulate. So I started, just like you said, as a kid, listening to Lanza or listening to Björling or listening to Di Stefano and trying to find this, you know, like going like, Usa divina, la presa, la presa, la presa, and feeling it only in falsetto and pretending I was singing it big.
Yeah.
And then the more I trained that, I remember my teacher had me like do scales, and we were just going like scales like that. and he was amazed at how well I mixed without any break. And he was like, "How are you doing that?" I was like, "I don't know, just practicing high notes and falsetto." And I just really, from a young age, ironed it out, and I was able to do a really good mix from my high notes before I learned how to integrate the chest voice. But yeah, so that helped.
And that's great, because it's okay to tell yourself, right now, my B flat, my high B flat is in falsetto. And that's something I also did. Like I'm with you. Like it's funny, you talking and I'm just like, yeah. Because I was very similar the same way as well. I would mimic a lot. But funny enough, the mimicry helped me understand. Perhaps I didn't know it was happening anatomically, but it helped me understand how instinctually things work. You know, the opening, certain openings of valve, and the top very falsetto, very and then gradually over time, you start to build that strength. You know, and it also happens with certain maturity as well. You know, if you're 19 years old, 20 years old, it's very difficult to try to chest that thing. It's okay for now to be heady voice. Once you start reaching 30, there is a natural process in which the chords does change, and it makes it easier to have that connection.
Yeah.
If you haven't done the work, if you haven't done the reinforcing that falsetto, building that and developing that voice, even at 30, you're going to struggle because you haven't done that voice. You know, it's not magic, and it doesn't happen overnight. It definitely is a process that takes years, and even still, you never quite master it. I mean, there's just no such thing as mastering the voice. At least I don't believe so. You're always a student to it. So that's really great. Let me ask you some of these top questions, and then I can let you go. Very busy question.
Go for it, man.
First one, vibrato. How can I make a natural vibrato sound? I try to make the vibrato sound, but it feels forced. And again, I try to make, already alarm sounds. I try to make the vibrato sound, but it feels forced. Is it something you do naturally, or is it something that you have to do conscientiously?
I think that it also, yes, I think that finding it through stuff like the trill and stuff like that. And for me, I had a natural vibrato when I was younger. For me, though, it was learning how to balance that with the air. I started to get a flicker vibrato when I was in college and school, and it was very quick because it was under a lot of pressure. Then, of course, I went to another extreme. A vibrato got a bit wide because I was worried so much about ironing out this area that I started to really work in straight tone, which is a great thing to do, mind you. But you have to always remember to keep it vibrant, you know? If you're going to sit here and go like, and go working the tilt and go, yeah, that's fine. But it's stuff like, or stuff like working harmonics and sitting here like trying to isolate a harmonic in straight tone and find it, and finding that you can't just stay there.
Right.
Then it's about working the vibrato, and for me, the important things are thinking of the vibrato being upward. So if this is the note, my vibrato is not this. It's this. It's up a half step.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, I will inevitably fall out of the harmonic. I'll sit here and go, yeah, fell out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's up. The vibrato lives here, not here.
Yeah.
If I think of my vibrato being here, I'm vibrating it that spot. Always thinking about it being like, again, I use imagery sometimes, and I think about fanning myself or splashing cold water against my face and thinking about up, 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 keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. And this is extremely, to me, maybe not for everybody, but to me, it's also extremely helpful when you are working descending phrases. You know, if you sit here and go like in Spirito Gentile, and you sit here and go, Spirito Gentile, you know, you need to think, you can't go, I'm me. Up, and there goes. You know, it must be because of 3 thumbs.
You know the answer. There you go again. Correct.
Hold on. What does this do? Does that do anything? If I do thumbs down? I guess not. Okay.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, to tag team on that, descending as well helps if you're a developing singer in which going higher tenses you, descending is actually a good idea. It's a good idea because if anything, it's lowering that pressure. It's going down instead of going up.
Absolutely.
Like I'm with you. For me, I've always had a natural vibrato, but I found it when I began to release the voice. In other words, for me, if a vibrato isn't something that you can technically control, like because if anything, that adds more tension. I think vibrato is just the result of free, relaxed phonation.
Absolutely.
And the chords can just vibrate freely without tension. The larynx is free, not compressed, not high, free. For me, as soon as I just relaxed into the sound, the vibrato sort of began to happen for me. At first, it might have been wild and fast, and then as with more development, it continued to be more controlled. But for me, I think if you don't have, or if you're struggling with vibrato, it's definitely a tension problem. Something around the tongue, something like that. It's
big
more
time. Big time. Yeah, Jack and I talk about trying to keep everything very loose in this spot. It's the idea of like, we call it like, if anybody out there knows Paul Lynde, the American comedian or something like that, just he had this way of talking like this, or old Katharine Hepburn or something like that. But it's really like you just demonstrated in the low range, just very much this and feeling like it's, and honestly going off of that and letting that be the basis.
Yeah, 100%. Funny enough, as we keep talking about it, we realize that the best ways to develop the singing voice is by making weird, funny noises that perhaps you're not used to. It's about letting it all be relaxed. I always say, like, if they shot you an anesthesia in your jaw and your tongue and everything is very numb, so and obviously follow it up with that good and that cry.
Jaw, just totally.
Focus on the sensation, not on the sound. That's the best part. Okay, number 2. How can I reduce or thin the chest voice in the sound as I ascend in my higher range and want to add more head voice? I try it, but it goes full falsetto when I do. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but we can address it again. So again, how can I reduce or thin the amount of chest voice in the sound as I ascend in my higher register? I want to add more head, but when I do, it just disconnects and goes to falsetto. What kind of exercises can I do?
For me, and again, it's less things I say in general, less about my advice to everybody and more what helped me and stuff like that. So for me, I have to think 2 poles. I have to think this as I ascend, and there has to be a feeling of when you draw anything out and thin it out, there's this action. So I have to always think tall. I always have to really also concentrate on vowel. I a lot of times have to think vowel, 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 vowel as I go up. Because inevitably, if all of a sudden I start thinking modification, it's really going to screw things up. So if like we did before in this, if I'm thinking, if all of a sudden I'm modifying, caught. Vowel. I'm thinking the whole time, and just thinking of this sensation the entire time.
I was gonna say, so instead of changing the vowel, it's more of maintaining the vowel tall. Never. Is that sort of the idea?
That's the idea. I tell people it's like it's like having a bendy or like having a straw, but not kinking the hose, so to speak. But it's like having one of the straws with the flexi neck where it goes, it extends and then goes up and over. So it's not breaking the tube and keeping everything open without a feeling of and all of a sudden having this happen, you know?
Yeah. And then to add to that, we already talked about this. If changing or if adding head voice to the chest is struggling you, then switch around. Start in falsetto and then add chest. Instead of going chest head, start in your head voice, start in your falsetto voice, and then gradually add the sound.
Totally.
And always with that cry, ha ha ha. That's all to relax yourself. To
stay light, morbidezza. Just stay light, cry.
How can I achieve the laryngeal tilt cover position? I can't seem to find it. It feels strained. It feels strained and open when I sing past an F sharp as a tenor. Are there any vocal exercises? So we're talking obviously about the covered sound. How do I go from to that sort of position? How does one find that?
I mean, there's a lot of things to keep into account when one is trying to do that. And whereas there are many moving parts and many different components, the temptation and the trick becomes not to overcomplicate it and think about it. Because for me, nothing will inhibit that action more than if my jaw and my tongue are involved. Mm-hmm. I can sit here and do as many things as I want to inside my throat. But if I'm trying to grab it from here, it will just get chesty. There'll be no turn, no tilt, no cover, no turn at all in the tone. So for me, a big thing that I do actually that helps a lot is like when I was learning really to do this was singing with my back against a wall. Entirely my back against the wall, the neck and everything. It's so inhibiting and really difficult to do. But it forces you, one, to really not cut off from the support, because what everybody wants to do naturally is when you talk about I need to tilt, I need to cover, is you will only focus on the throat, and then you're already down a very dangerous path. So if you've completely cut off from everything here and you're solely focusing on, okay, I need to narrow, I need to do this, this will prevent, I find, from doing that. You'll notice the tendency to go further with the chin, move your head away from the wall. It's like, no, really discipline yourself to be against it entirely. Make sure the jaw is not active, and think about really singing around. I coached when I was a young artist with Piotr Becała, and he's just still to this day, you know, he's become a friend, and he's a really nice guy, and he's in town now. We chatted a bit and stuff like that, and he's just really approachable and a great guy, and more importantly, he really knows technique. He's a very good technician, and he would talk all the time about singing around the ball and thinking about this idea of the voice taking this path, which is absolutely true. And I didn't really realize what he meant, but it's just because if these components get too busy, you're not going to feel that action. So really thinking about a neutral position here. As I kind of keep this position, if I go or and keeping it's very natural. There's no which is okay to get the lift, but I'm more so demonstrating that my jaw is getting active.
Yeah. Just to say, so in other words, to summarize, disconnect any sort of jaw and tongue from the. It doesn't help, right? That the vowels aren't formed here, anyways. You know, they're formed by the root of the tongue and mainly here. The sound is internal. And it's funny that you mentioned this ball, like that Piotr Becała talks about, because I also in a way describe it or feel that sensation of imagine you have like this invisible golf ball there, right? Which is funny enough. We're talking about that yawn position again. Is that opening? And if you're able to open that and disconnect everything else from it, and just focus on the phonation aspect and the part, you should be able to be in a better state for the laryngeal tilt to just happen naturally.
Yes,
if you're
exactly that, and also work from closed vowels. That is the big thing that helps me. Is thinking about vocalizzi like boom, boom, things like boom, 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 things that are going to have a deeper orientation to begin with. One of my favorite exercises is going like, or something like, boom, 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 boom. I'm already thinking tilt there. If I let it get to boom, boom, boom.
That's it.
Boom, boom, excuse me, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, I'm already thinking tilt. Boom, 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 boom. And then once I get it to boom, 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 boom. I've already gone into boom, 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 boom. It's not boom, 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 boom. And I've already got it down. And I have to start to think, keeping the ooh tube.
Yeah, yeah. Ooh is a great vowel, and that sound has a sigh. I always say, does it have a sigh in it? Boom, 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 boom. Does it have that? It should always have that. If it goes, boom, it doesn't have it anymore.
1,000%. Also, what you just demonstrated is something I also mentioned too, and it's awesome you do that. Is coming off of notes like that in a sigh.
In a sigh.
Going the G, like going boom, 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 to make sure, am I pressurizing? Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, you'll feel it. Boom, boom. Make sure it's staying soft. So 100%, yes, agree.
Fantastic. All right, last one. Can you? Ooh, this is a wow. Okay, baby. Can you break down the function of appoggio? My teachers taught me to stick my belly out when I breathe. This sounds kind of like a Germanic sort of idea, right? Stick your belly out when you breathe. We could try to keep this simple, obviously, because the appoggio is like it's almost like its own video. But can you break down the function of appoggio in a very simple manner?
That's a very good question. Can we? I don't know.
For me, I've always said, appoggio technically is something we could do natural, right? It's not like something we need to, I have to go work out my abs to appoggio. And for me, it's always been kind of like calling out. We do this naturally sometimes when we call out to a friend very far away. Hey, 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 Fred, hey, hey. If we actually put our hands in our abdominals, we feel this sort of movement in which sort of the top kind of protrudes and the bottom kind of, it comes out, it comes in internally. Hey, hey! And if we were to put like anything hard there, which I always tell my students so you could feel it, you would feel this in a way, come out and suspend. Hey, 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 hey! And so the idea for me, as far as breaking down appoggio, is that as long as you maintain this side to the sound and that chord closure, the support is a natural thing we can do. It's sort of that protrusion and an internal sort of support. All we do as singers, that same sound, we just sustain it, right? Hey, 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 hey. It's that same sort of sound. If you want to break it down to its simplest term, there's no sticking out, right?
No.
What would you?
No. It's exactly. There's just a few things I always have to keep in mind when I do that. Is exactly like you said. This consistent kind of lean in the transverse abs. I have to feel that. That little tuck down there has to be intact. Mm-hmm. And I've experimented with all this stuff with the back breathing, back support, almost supporting my inhale before I breathe, a lot of this stuff. But for me, one of my favorite exercises to do is just to do a very silent inhale, completely imperceptible, expand everything, and then hold that as long as I can without closing my throat. So I'm not going and then closing, but simply staying expanded. And it's almost like a like a, what do you want to call it? Like one of those shoe trees for a pair of boots. It like stretches you open and keeps everything and keeps this anchored the whole time.
Yeah, like never hold your breath and just, but keep it.
It almost feels like you're consistently still breathing in and expanding, even though you're stopping inhaling.
Yeah, the very suspended.
Big time, suspended, and keep that. And then once you can't hold it anymore, just like a nice sigh kind of in there, gentle. And that's a huge thing going with the appoggio. Jack always really avoided getting too much into support with me because he is a firm believer, and that's a very old school belief. Caruso used to say it, a lot of people, that you simply can't breathe yourself into the right phonation. You can do as many all that you want, but if the phonation's off, nothing's going to work. Exactly. And to a degree, even Melocchi didn't really speak too much about support and about that idea. So much of the idea was just about what is happening here in terms of phonation. And he's a believer that if this is working, this too. I do agree with that as well. However, I was at one point over supporting, and I had to go see somebody else a bit just to, Jack was totally fine with that. He's like, yeah, if you need someone to kind of clarify the musculature of it. And I started to get with somebody who actually really taught me how to actually engage the low abs a bit more. In addition to that, like you just said, out tuck kind of thing, I was missing the tuck. And I noticed when I was doing that, my epigastrium and everything was very rock hard because I was supporting too high. Yeah. And this gentleman I said was Gerald Martin Moore, and he did really great things with me breathing.
Gerald, lovely guy.
Gerald, yeah, he's wonderful. And Gerald would just poke at me and goes, "It's way too stiff here." And then he's like, "I see nothing happening below your belly button." And I said, "Am I supposed to feel something?" He's like, "Yeah." And we did some exercises with, the idea of blowing up a balloon and thinking about a very balloon right out of the bag. It's you can't blow it up with air in your cheeks. You can't go, it'll pop back in your face. But the idea of finding just this steady stream of air that's so narrow and focused, and the first place you feel it when you do that exhale is boom, right in the lower abs. The tuck activates automatically almost.
Yeah. That's why a lot of also teachers teach with a straw, that sort of very thin straw, or put the straw inside a cup of water and let it bubble. And so you could feel that when you're breathing out through a very thin sort of tube, you can feel that actually support happening, that 100%. Engagement. And I do love also what Jack says. I remember that. I studied his video so cautiously when I was in a traumatic point in my life. And I remember he does say that. He says a lot of people try to fix their support to fix the sound, and the support will get fixed by itself. And I do believe that as well. It's always nice to know what's happening scientifically or anatomically, but I would say there's nothing you can physically, technically do to in the support portion of the voice if just the sound itself is not.
Absolutely. I've lost track of how many times over the last years when things weren't going well, the first place I instinctively went to was my body and my support. I said, "Oh, I feel lazy. I've been out of shape. I had in the last year, I had a hernia surgery. I had, before that, I was sick. I had COVID for a while, and it always went down to my support's done. What it was either because I was, quote, lazy, I was singing loose, and my adduction wasn't very firm, or I completely lost tilt in this range, and I was shoving it all way too forward. Yeah. I got into a dangerous period a while ago, not even that long ago, but a year and a half ago, where my eval was so shoved forward because I was trying to go for, like we do sometimes as tenors, we're changing hats and I have to do light rep. And I was doing at the time operetta, and I was doing Gluck, and I was doing a lot of Mozart, and I was doing some Schubert, that I went into this, okay, I need to sing with this, which is like everything up. Instead of just singing the way, I can do that same thing. But I thought I needed to go like, which is like my
it's very ceiling. Yeah, very much a ceiling in anything you sing. It's like putting a roof. There's very hard to continue going up when constrained. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. And I got away from the proper phonation, and that's what fixed it when I said, let me get back to that was the problem.
Fantastic. Yeah, and with support as well. Last thing to talk about it, because I know you probably have to go. It's like you said, maintain it pliable as well. It's supposed to be an anchor, but there's also a danger in stiffness. it should always be. I always feel like it's always elastic. Everything about the voice is elastic. The sigh is elastic. Ha! The support is elastic. It's pliable. You know, ha 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 ha. It's kind of like a hiccup, but instead of it's kind of outwards. Ha 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 ha. It's very like wow. I'm like floating like a rubber, like elastic, like an elastic to pliable.
Yeah, flexibly firm is the key.
Yeah,
you know?
flexibly firm. I love that. Yeah. Andrew, thanks so much, man. I really
My pleasure,
appreciate
man. Thank you so much for having me.
it. Was so cool to hear from you. You know, someone who's been doing this for many years, singing in world-class stages. What do you have coming up, by the way, so that people know?
Well, I live here in Zurich. I'm a soloist in the ensemble here, and I finished my last thing in the spring, which was a brand new production we did of The Merry Widow with Barry Kosky directing. It was just a great experience. And I just had a bunch of concerts and some things and recitals, and I leave in a few days to head to Cincinnati for Paul McCartney's Liverpool Oratorio. So never been staged before. They're going to stage it like an opera for the very first time ever, and Paul will, to some degree, be involved, we're told, and hopefully he'll be there, and I'm literally playing him in the piece, so it's pretty cool.
Oh, that's fantastic. They're doing that a lot. Oratorio work or concert work that is staged, kind of like an opera. It's starting to kind of the trend. So everybody, I encourage you go watch this guy at what he does best.
Thank you, man.
Cincinnati Opera, or you're near Cincinnati Opera, go absolutely.
Do it. Definitely come.
Hopefully this is also not the last time we hear of you. We are always welcome back, and we can keep chatting and talking about more stuff. All right, man. You got. All right.
Sorry. Take it easy.
Take it easy. Ciao, ciao.